My personal feeling is that the world is more scared with the agents than they are interested in playing with them. And that narrative is likely to change in the next year and a half, because I'm seeing a lot of activity in the startup ecosystem where people are experimenting rapidly with the utility of these agents which can think and act.
Welcome to a new episode of All Aboard, the show where we have real conversations with IT and security practitioners. No fluff, no talking points, just straight talk from experts and advice for tackling the toughest problems facing cloud-forward companies today. I'm your host, Alex Bovee, CEO and co-founder of Conductor One. Welcome back to the All Aboard podcast. I'd be completely remiss if we didn't do at least one AI episode, so here we are. It's happening. Joining me today are Nancy Wang, venture partner at Felicis and a seasoned tech veteran in her own right, who spent time at AWS and Rubrik, and Ashish Popli, former CISO at UiPath and Spotnana. Nancy and Ashish have spent a lot of time in the space, both as practitioners and investors, and so we've got a lot of perspective in this episode. On that note, we end up going deep on several areas of AI, including the implications of domain-specific models, the security risks associated with AI agents, and the implications of build versus buy when it comes to investing in AI technology. Without further ado, let's dive right in. All right. I'm super excited. This is the first triumvirate of an All Aboard episode. I'm joined today by Ashish Popli, Nancy Wang, both security experts in their own right. And today we're going to be talking about, candidly, a subject that I know almost nothing about, which is AI agents, LLM security, semi-autonomous AI bots, and lots of kind of adjacencies there. But before we jump into it, maybe we'll just do a quick intro. Nancy, maybe tell the audience a little bit about yourself, and then we'll jump over to Ashish.
Sure. I promise we'll make this entertaining as we try to sandwich, Alex in between Ashish and myself. Hello, everybody. Nancy Wang. I'm currently a venture partner with Felicis, who is very proud to be an investor in Alex's company, Conductor One. Before joining on the dark side, I've done product engineering for over a decade in data storage products, as well as data protection and data security. And so through the unstructured and structured data route is how I got into the security world. Ashish, over to you.
Hey, thanks both. Thanks for inviting Alex. I've been a security practitioner for 20 plus years. I've worked at some of the large and small companies like Microsoft, Google, and built a security team from scratch for UiPath. And most recently did a similar thing for a travel technology startup called Spotnana.
All right, awesome. So between the three of us, I'm embarrassed to say how many years of security cumulative experience there might be, but I don't know, maybe it's 40. I'm not aging something like that. It's gonna be pretty high. So we should have there's gonna be a lot of juicy and awesome things to talk about in the context of this. And just to jump right into it, the topic of conversation is this truly evolving area around a security of sort of like semi-autonomous bots and agents. And if you think about LLMs working on the context of users, a lot of security implications there. Maybe Nancy, let's start with you, but help me understand, like, what are AI agents? Like, just give everyone and explain it like I'm five. What does it mean? And maybe just some of the high level security concerns around AI bots and LLM agents.
Yeah, sure. So, from I would say product perspective, right? Agents are kind of represent like the next logical step after LLMs. I think by this point, all of us are very familiar. I asked ChatGPT to send me some recipes if I'm hankering for, let's say, chicken nuggets, right? But from an enterprise perspective, and I've been in enterprise space now for a lot of years. Let's just say that, right? Where it's all about how do you get workflows to work together, right? And that's really where agents come in. I definitely want to hear Ashish's thoughts on this too, because he's actually exploring some ideas here. But one thing I'll say on the security side is, a lot of people talk about jailbreaking LLMs, right? Or prompt injection was really the craze. And you saw a ton of companies start up in this space. Is really from an enterprise perspective, I actually think that it's less about the LLMs themselves and compromising the model, but actually, if you build applications, let's say using a framework like LangChain or Llama Index, or there's many examples out there, it's actually about the system level access and permissions, right? So what do sort of the agents that are using these workflows have access to? And that's really where it becomes a more of a traditional AppSec problem. So Ashish, what are your thoughts and where do you see opportunities in this space?
Yeah, I think this general question of what truly is an agent seems to elude many people. So I have my own definition of what I like to call an agent in this modern world now. Um, for me, fundamentally, it comes down to a system that has machine-like intelligence, whatever that means to whoever, all the way from basic rule-based to artificial general. There is variety in that. So an agent must have some machine intelligence and some execution capability. When you combine them together, it becomes an agent of sorts. And people use all kinds of words around this, co-pilots and this and that. But if you have those two properties, they become agents for me.
Makes sense. And then, so I think a good way to explore this conversation is it feels like there's two sides of the coin. There's kind of what are the security implications of agents within your own environment? And let's talk about that for a second around data and security and those pieces. The second piece, I think, and really excited to get your takes on these, Ashish, is also like, what are the opportunities from like a practitioner perspective? Because I think clearly AI and LLMs and that technology is really revolutionizing just what security teams can get done. And I think would love to explore that a little bit further. But first, let's stay on the AppSec part of it and the security part of it. Can either one of you talk a little bit about what are some of the high level security concerns right now that practitioners are thinking about and actually grappling with around AI bots?
Sure. So I'm happy to start. Maybe I'll start with a fun analogy, and Ashish will bring us to the serious side here. Is I think from an enterprise perspective, right? A lot of what my customers at AWS would tell me is this concept of proxied identity, right? That they're scared what these systems are going to do on their behalf. And probably the best analogy for this in our day-to-day lives would be like you place a food order on DoorDash, right? The delivery driver who's actually delivering your food, right, is fetching your order using your user identity, right? And then, they'll use someone else's identity, so on and so forth, for fetching other orders. Obviously, that's a fun example, but in the enterprise perspective, right, we used to operate from this model of really kind of a almighty godlike, user role where that role can do anything and everything. Right. Obviously, that's going to be an anti-pattern, and we should probably move away from that, which is where, Ashisha's thoughts will come in. But this is going to be really important because we have a lot of expectations for these agents, right? You see AI agents for legal, you see AI agents for like the SOC, for example. There's all these industries and wrappers on top of models that are delivering AI agent capabilities.
Yeah, I think, Nancy, you're right about the agent behavior relative to resources that they access. There are some risks there for sure. But to back up a little bit, I think since Alex is talking about this idea of uh, machine learning models and neural network based systems that are able to classify and do things much more smarter than the previous generation, um, I think we should divide the world into two parts and say there are certain problems that are inherent to the model capabilities, and then there are certain problems that arise as a result of people putting these models to use for workflows. They are two separate worlds for most part, and they both have data security problems, but the prevalence of the issue or the issue at hand seems to be much more problematic in terms of when you start using these models as agents, the machine intelligence part that you start to exploit.
Can you expand, I think, Ashish, on that first part, particularly around like the data security aspects of it? Because to me, it feels particularly dangerous when you combine those two perspectives. The idea of a autonomous agent, effectively a machine identity, for the lack of a better term, operating on behalf of kind of another user with access to that same data. It's kind of like what could go wrong. So like from a security practitioner standpoint, like how do you think about actually like just even understanding the risk there? Is it just about visibility? Is it about like shaping OAuth tokens? Not to get too much into the weeds here, but like it does feel like the data visibility and the data access piece is like a major, not question mark, but like security risk at some level.
Yeah. So in the world of how when we turn this machine intelligence into something that can execute a task, it has to assume certain identity, whether that's a machine or something else. So all of this is in the general realm of identity and access management. The world has not changed quite a bit in the sense that previously actions of users and actions of applications were very tightly guarded against any resource that they were accessing. And we've all come to grow in role-based access models and attribute-based access models. And it's a pretty mature industry in the sense that we care about what access you should have to a given piece of data based on what your role is, and so on and so forth. Now, when you start using, let's say, enterprise data in the context of a RAG-based, agent-based framework, you really start to lose a sight of whatever that agent is it supposed to have access to this enterprise data or not? Because there are no frameworks for role-based access control in this multi-agent, multi-app economy that's about to arise. So that is a real problem. You can't take old school thinking of role-based access control because the app is now the model, which itself has some data in it. And the way you interact with the app now is through natural language, which is the equivalent of your writing code. So we're kind of upside down in many ways with respect to traditional thinking about security not working anymore. So it definitely is a ripe ground for innovation on how to think about data security in the context of these multi-agent systems that will consume enterprise context.
Yeah, and coming from more of a traditional kind of enterprise security perspective, right? I mean, just talking to a lot of big banks or even federal agencies, right? And you'll notice that, a lot of the foundation model companies like OpenAI and Anthropic now have fairly large federal groups, right? And of course, that's all going to be learning about how to deploy these models or in later on, I'm sure, agent workflows in those specific environments are all about, give the user, right, who's issuing this prompt or this query only the data that they are allowed to see. And so, Alex, you brought up a good point, which is the downstream, right, OAuth tokens or understanding, the auth for example, things like Jira or Confluence, right? Soon it won't be users going to those apps and looking up their information. It'll actually be agents or systems, right? And I don't want to take us down a rabbit hole here on machine identities, but from again the old school enterprise world, system roles had a lot of power, right? They were often privileged access, right, roles. So how do you sort of combine the old school way of thinking or more traditional now with the new age world where the agents really are going to be mimicking users accessing these applications and deriving data? I think on top of that too, right, a lot of concerns I've heard, let's just say, a major player in a writing system, for example, right? They're training their model off of a lot of how users or enterprise workers are constructing their emails or maybe even their blog posts. But who knows, right? I wouldn't certainly want my personal emails to be then sent out as examples to either yourself, Alex, no offense, right? Or Ashish, if you guys are saying, hey, can you construct me an email with these pointers, right? So then how do you ensure that your personal data is not going to be used as training data?
I think this is so. I didn't realize the nuance of these AI bots until you both framed it up in this context. But it is super interesting to think about an AI bot between the spectrum of like, is it an application or is it a human, and sort of where on that, because clearly it's not one or the other, but it's kind of like somewhere in this little bit of a middle territory where if you think about how you would secure applications, it's you can tighten and restrict the access and the authorization that an application has because it's very easy. You know exactly what that application does, very predictable behavior. Humans inherently have unpredictable behavior that they're going to do lots of different things and they might answer lots of different questions. So, I mean, and maybe this is a little bit of a lame question, but are AI bots more human at the end of the day, or are they more application, or is it just truly like we have to figure out what makes sense in the context of maybe the use cases?
Let me take that one, Nancy. I think it's a sincere question, Alex, whether these models are human or machines. I think the answer lies in the spectrum, in the sense that if you take an out-of-the-box foundational model, they are not human or they're not personified. But through the use of fine-tuning and instruction tuning, you can personify them and give human-like behavior in that sense. And that does have a very deep impact on how much trust you can place in these systems. So this idea of using foundational models for general purpose intelligence is that economy is growing really fast. But I do believe that for production grade systems, the fine tuning and domain constrained models will bring us closer to enterprise adoption because we do need that control in the end to not make the kind of mistakes that Nancy and I were previously alluding to.
Well, look, I mean, if you're going to ask any of these new AI apps, for example, buddies or companions or character AI, they might argue that they do have sentience and are capable of emotions.
Yeah. To go a little bit further on that question, we're thinking about an AI bot. We talked about some of the security implications of it. I would love to get in a little bit of the use cases, and particularly, where do you view the most promise in terms of like security implications of using AI bot technology and maybe even like LLM technology?
Being a practitioner for a number of years now and seeing various parts of a typical security organization, ranging from AppSec to infrastructure security to governance, risk, and compliance, and even just basic contextual training for employees, it's kind of very clear that the security industry has been sort of very much formal around finding guarantees of X, Y, and Z happening, and they're you know, mostly based on rule-based systems. And then there's an upper limit to maintenance of rule-based systems. So, and even if you have rule-based systems, creation and management of rules was a human task. Consuming the output of security technologies and putting workflows around them was a human task. Now, that's Gen previous. Gen current is that, well, we can go from rule-based to understanding-based systems, semantic systems. So that's a ray of hope. And then we can take some of the pressure away from human workflow involvements, tasks that humans have to do, and give it to the so-called agents. So going back to my previous comment, if you can take machine intelligence in favor of rule-based systems, and if you can take the power of workflow automation from machines, then you're actually not only increasing the fidelity of the system, but you're also reducing the cost of security, which I think is a boon to the security people because it's an asymmetric warfare. There is no hope in hell to win, quote unquote. Comes from a practitioner, but so what? The idea is that if we can't, beat them, let's make it easier on us to, protect ourselves by raising the fidelity and reducing the cost. So that's the general idea of the opportunity in this space. And now, obviously, we can go into specific examples of where exactly we can, start to leverage this power.
Yeah, and I feel like that's kind of mirrored in other industries as well, right? You mentioned a lot of systems that previously rule-based can, for example, different, filtering policies or whatnot. We also see this in other industries too, like for example, legal tech, back office compliance, where, legal documents are actually fairly well structured, right? When you chunk it up, hey, this is the abstract or this is where the case summary is or so on and so forth. And so I feel like those are probably going to be the lowest hanging fruit use cases as well for the security industry, which is things that are fairly root, right? And they may not require a lot of, I would say, higher order processes. But I think where it starts getting interesting, Ashish, right, is some of the reasoning that you bring to the table as a CISO, or Alex, right, you bring as you're trying to solve customers' identity, right, governance issues, is some of that higher order reasoning, right? Which is deciding what is right and what is wrong, and not just predicting, okay, what is the next likely token?
Yeah, I mean, to click into that a little bit, I think something I don't have a strong opinion on, but I'd love to get both of your takes as sort of experts in this field, spending a lot more time than I have, obviously, is the spectrum between, does it make more sense for bots to be sort of like general purpose or specific? Meaning, in the future, are we going to have AI bots that are like incident response bots, or are they going to be more like, security operations or like GDPR bots all up? And then the second part of that question is, are companies going to be more successful building that kind of technology in-house, or does it make a lot more sense to get that sort of like out of the box? Like, can you create technology that's reusable and applicable to multiple different countries? I don't know, Sheesh, if you want to jump into this one first.
A simple-minded approach will tell you that when a child is born, they don't have a lot of context. And then, people acquire general intelligence as they grow up, right? But then people also go to school for specific specialties. And you don't give specialist jobs to generalist people. You give the specialist job to a specialist person. So this idea of a general purpose model being useful is true, but is it useful to the point of being good, really, really good, close to human good, helping the human good for a specialist job? Will require fine tuning and instruction tuning. in a domain constrained way. And that's the way that's, I think, already on the horizon. You are seeing that general purpose AI systems are not succeeding at customer service tasks. I mean, there was a euphoria about, hey, I can generate an image based on text. I mean, even yesterday I saw two LinkedIn posts talking about, I asked the AI tool to create a gymnastics video and it looks awful. Like it almost looks like alien at that point. So I think the point is that you have to train the system to a domain for it to become a specialist. The utility of these systems will go up in that sense. And I think I forgot your second related question. I think it was about, should we build a platform that does this?
Oh,
Build
Just
a
repeat
and
it.
yeah.
and yeah, sort of like build versus buy. Like, does it make sense for that answer? I totally appreciate it. It makes a lot of sense around the specialization. And so in that context, can what role does a company to the vendor relationship like can the vendor provide a platform, or can they actually provide, like more out of the box technology that just works, or are companies going to be left to build a lot of these things because their business processes are just so specific?
Yeah, and I think it's going to be a bit of a spectrum. I don't think there's a one size fits all in that sense. My sense and my gut is that it is the similar problem of, should I train existing employees into a domain or should I hire an expert, right? It's build versus buy. We're building existing employees versus buying new specialists, right? So people do both approaches all the time. But what is more interesting to me in this question is, where is the development and innovation opportunity? The fact that at least I'm proclaiming that you can't rely on general purpose systems for specialist tasks. Building these specialist systems require a lot of supply chain and underpinning. So there's a huge platform opportunity, and which is what we see by these various vendors out there who are saying, okay, I'm going to build a general purpose orchestration framework, LangChain. Amazing. We all need them for multi-agent systems. I'm going to build vector DBs. There's 6 or 7 of them which are going to be good. So the the machinery required to build these specialist systems is where there's a huge platform opportunity. And then my bet is that in finely contained spaces or domains, some systems might get really good enough that you don't need to build them anymore and you can just buy them from a vendor. For example, one of the thoughts that been sort of coming to my mind for a long period of time in the security space is, okay, there is general purpose security training. People know what 2FA is, people know what phishing is, and there's systems and platforms available, varying degrees of complexity and effectiveness. But that's general purpose. What if I want a system that actually trains me on problems that are very relevant to my enterprise environment? I think a general purpose system like that can be built better than general purpose guidance on security, right? So, and that may be a solution that people don't have to build themselves. They can just buy and move on. If you think of a more complex operation where one might think of building on their own, is when you start attacking a bigger area. Let's say I want to have a CISO in a box like enterprise multi-agent security system, which knows a bunch about GRC, which knows a bunch about AppSec, which knows a bunch about SecOps. Those things are very good. It's going to be very hard for a single vendor to figure that part out, that scope out. So there's almost going to be parts of this problem where the vendor will provide some base platform, but this idea of training the CISO in a box like situation would be a joint responsibility between the platform provider and the enterprise security people. Okay, fine. You gave me something that can suck up a lot of context from, CSPMs, from EDRs and what have you. But then does it actually embody my philosophy of security? That's fine tuning. That's instruction tuning. So we would need to see places where, it's like going to a doctor. A doctor can sort of read the whole book, but they always like to practice in their own ways. They have theses about how to prescribe a medicine, how to diagnose. And that's equivalent to security people saying, well, I got everything that you can give me, but it's my job to figure out how to use it. And that figure out how to use it is impersonating my philosophies into the system. So it's along that spectrum that I feel the larger the scope, the difficult for a platform vendor to play.
Yeah, and I think to sum it up, actually, I spoke to two founders today, and good timing, I guess, Alex. You probably read my calendar, where actually each represented a very different school of thought, right? The morning meeting I had was actually a founder who is tackling the AI services space and thinking about how do you actually do a composable toolkit, right? Which, regardless of what industry, what vertical, what end problem, we can essentially make this generalist enough where it's almost like, to your point, right? Hiring CISO in the box or hiring a Accenture, Deloitte, what have you, right? Center of excellence to help you with setting up your own AI apps. Now, on the other hand, in the afternoon, I spoke with a founder who's actually building an AI agent for incident response teams. And obviously for that, he's using a ton of more proprietary data from, as you can imagine, all the observability players like Datadog, Sumo Logic, App Dynamics, so on and so forth. And you betcha that that AI agent is going to be especially tuned, right, to help, for example, developers debug code or understand if an alarm fires, what part of their code transcribes or correlates to that piece or that alarm or metric, right? So I feel like those represent sort of this two schools of thought right now. And I'm kind of curious, Ashish, especially as you're doing more investigation, or Alex, as you're, I'm sure, baking, AI into your platform, what way you guys are headed.
Well, so okay, tying this back to what Ashish said earlier about you gave like the doctor analogy. Maybe the answer is it ends up being both. Maybe you have general practitioners that are kind of AI bots in their own right that are good at kind of broad things, but they can also interface with your specialist, your brain surgeon, your heart surgeon, your orthopedics, like those folks that are the incident response and so forth. So that is a very uneducated response to not knowing a ton about this space, but I would say maybe there's a little bit of room for both in terms of like broad based, almost categorical level, like CISO in a box type, agency, but that's able to interact actually with more of your specialist and I don't know, Ashish, what do you think? I'm rambling here. I'm not the expert at all, but that was a hot take.
Yeah, I mean, look, obviously this is a complex situation. Nobody's an expert. I'm also leading from intuition and a little bit more reading on various research papers that are out there and listening to other leaders in the space. Um, I actually want to turn this question a little bit differently and bring it close to where you are today in the Conductor One product space, effectively. I think if we use that example, I think we can probably do a better job of articulating the boundaries of what's possible as a generalist and what's possible as a specialist. I've used your product. I love it. And there came a point where I was like, this whole issue of what should be the right policy for the duration of access be, and this notion of should this duration be adaptive based on some other signal. This is a human task right now. It requires context and it requires execution. Would you build an AI agent that helps your customers figure out the right duration of access based on certain parameters? And would you go execute that for the customer? Like, explore that for a second.
Yes, the answer is yes. So I think to your point, there is no doubt in my mind that, and it's actually really interesting that you bring this up. We have, I think this customer is going to be talking about this more publicly soon, but we have a customer who's hooking up their own homegrown AI bot around access decision making to Conductor One to help automate some of those even human in the loop decisions, which I think is like super fascinating. But
Wow.
on that note, the way that they're able to do it and the way that we're sort of exploring doing it as well is you can only really do it if you have the context, and it's like deep business context to your business. It's understanding the entitlements, users, permissions, previous access control decisions within your environment. Maybe you can look at, some best practices across the board and broad-based data set. But to your point, it's almost the unlock is almost the data set behind it that helps you make that better decision and helps provide the right experience there. So I think to answer your question directly, like, yeah, I think that is a useful capability and feature, and we should do it.
Actually, I was going to say that's pretty
Uh,
fancy, having an AI agent now doing the just-in-time access granting. I guess, how do you escalate if that AI agent made the wrong call? Who do you call?
well, that's where like kind of the product still comes into play. Like we've got escalation workflows, and you've got the whole ability to like change policies and escalate and say this went to the wrong person or the wrong decision was made. So you still, I don't think, and maybe there's a little bit of like a product point here around AI agents. You almost have to probably expect that they're not perfect And so how do you build the right product experiences to assume imperfection? And what does that actually look like?
I mean, go to Tesla or, autonomous driving level 1 through 5. The state of the art is exactly based on amount of context and data that you have. And in the world of security, we're probably going to start from level 1 and hope to achieve level 5 in 15 years or something, right? It's really about that
Yeah.
sharing of context and data between the platform provider and the customer. If you're not fine tuning, if you're not instruction tuning, you're probably going to stay at level 1. But the ball is in your court. I mean, enjoy at that point.
Totally. Wrapping up here, this has been an awesome conversation. I love jumping into just some of the AppSec considerations around AI bots, some of the applications, super interesting. Again, this is a space that we're scratching at, but it does feel like early days just across the board on AI and what it can do. I guess, Nancy, starting with you, do you have any spicy security predictions for 2024, 2025? And then we'll go to Ashish.
Yeah, I guess I mean we didn't really cover this. Maybe it's worth a whole nother episode. Is what happens to non-human, right? Is that its own standalone platform, or does that merge with other platforms? I'm sure you have thoughts on this, right? And kind of where I'm getting at with this is from a traditional AppSec angle, right? System roles and frankly, like things like service accounts, right, were big parts of my world and how my team would build software, right? So not going to name employers here, but I did work in places that had multiple engineers logged into the same service account, right, deploying to prod. So who do you know did what, right? And so I think a lot of those questions are going to get pulled into the forefront as we have more AI agents or non-human, right, identities accessing critical data and critical systems.
Yeah.
Yours is always spicy, so hit us.
I don't know. My personal feeling is that the world is more scared with the agents than they are interested in playing with them. And that narrative is likely to change in the next year and a half, because I'm seeing a lot of activity in the startup ecosystem where people are experimenting rapidly with the utility of these agents which can think and act. In the GRC space, there's a lot of low-hanging fruit that's close to production ready at this point. And there's at least half a dozen companies that I know in that space. In the AppSec space, earlier or later part of last year, I saw people doing code generation for remediation, people doing rudimentary threat models with the code and enterprise context in general. SecOps, I think, is too hot to be missed for agent-based technology. I think in the next 12 to 16 months, the reaction will go from I'm afraid to I'm semi-delighted. It should happen because there's too much in the making here.
I love it. And I love that optimism. And I totally agree. I think people are always a little bit terrified first when there's a new technology or technology shift. And then you realize all the things that it can do for you and how it can make your life better. And then it's great. And then the world gets better. Ashish, Nancy, thank you both for being on. Really appreciate it. It's a great episode. And I don't know, see you soon, I guess, in person. Hopefully.
Yeah. We'll catch you at Black Hat, I'm sure.
That's right. Yeah, I'll be there. I'll see you there. Take care.
Yep. Take care. Thanks. See you
Thanks
soon.
for having us on.
Thanks for tuning in. This episode of All Aboard is brought to you by the team at Conductor One. We'd love to hear your feedback. Send us a message at allaboard@conductor1.com. Till next time.